Police officers harassed an elderly black woman on her porch, their arrogance on full display. But when her son arrived, their faces went pale, realizing they had crossed a line. Evelyn Harris, a 78-year-old African-American woman with soft silver hair and eyes that held the depth of a lifetime's wisdom, sat quietly on the porch of her modest home on the outskirts of Atlanta, Georgia. Her hands, worn from decades of hard work, moved gently as she rocked her chair back and forth, gazing out at the familiar street where she had lived for more than 50 years. Born in the segregated South during the 1940s, Evelyn had witnessed the powerful winds of change blow through her world. She raised her family amidst the civil rights movement, marching alongside Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., braving fire hoses and snarling police dogs. Through it all, she instilled in her children the values of perseverance, dignity, and education as the true tools for a brighter future. Her greatest pride was her son, Aaron Harris. Against formidable odds, Aaron had risen from humble beginnings to become one of Georgia's most respected judges. At 50 years old, his courtroom was a beacon of fairness, known for his commitment to justice that transcended race and social class. Despite his remarkable success, Aaron remained grounded, never forgetting the roots that had shaped him. Every Sunday, without fail, he would visit his mother, bringing groceries and spending hours listening to her stories, soaking in her wisdom. For Evelyn, his visits were cherished, and she kept his childhood room just as it had been, a living shrine to the dreams she'd nurtured in her only son. Over the years, the neighborhood surrounding Evelyn had changed. Once a close-knit black community, the area had gradually gentrified, with new, mostly white families moving in, renovating homes, and pushing property values higher. Evelyn observed these changes with a blend of curiosity and quiet apprehension. She welcomed the new neighbors with her characteristic warmth, but remained watchful, understanding the subtle shifts in dynamics. Yet, despite all the changes around her, Evelyn stood as a constant in the community. She volunteered at her local church, tended a small vegetable garden from which she shared produce with neighbors, and always had a warm meal ready for anyone who needed it. Her home, though worn with age, with peeling paint and lovingly tended flowers, stood in quiet contrast to the freshly renovated houses that had begun to line the street. This particular afternoon, as she sat on her porch sipping a glass of sweet tea, Evelyn watched the world go by. She offered a nod and a smile to Mrs. Thornton, a new resident on the block who was out walking her meticulously groomed poodle. Evelyn noticed the way Mrs. Thornton's pace quickened as she passed by, clutching her purse a little tighter. A familiar sadness settled over Evelyn. She had lived through too many years of such quiet mistrust, a lifetime's worth of being seen as different. Still, she straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and continued to rock gently in her chair. Evelyn had weathered far more difficult storms than this, and she wasn't one to be easily shaken. But the peace of the afternoon was soon shattered. The blare of police sirens pierced the calm, jerking Evelyn from her thoughts. She sat up, her heart pounding as two police cruisers sped down the street, their tires screeching to a halt in front of Mrs. Thornton's house, just 3 doors down. Evelyn's pulse quickened, old memories stirring, memories of past encounters with law enforcement that were rarely kind. From her porch, she watched as 3 officers stepped out, 2 white men and a Latina woman. Their hands hovered near their holsters as they approached Mrs. Thornton, who stood on her front lawn, waving her arms frantically. Evelyn strained to hear what was being said, catching only fragments of the conversation that drifted through the heavy, humid air. Suspicious person. Doesn't belong here. Lurking around. Evelyn felt the weight of those words, words she had heard too many times before, and her heart sank. The quiet life she had worked so hard to preserve was about to face another storm, one that she sensed would test her strength once more. A shiver traced down Evelyn's spine as she saw Mrs. Thornton gesturing directly at her house. Before she could fully comprehend the situation, a group of officers was already making their way towards her porch, their steps brisk and deliberate. Evelyn's hands tightened around the arms of her rocking chair, fighting the tremor in her fingers as she braced herself for whatever lay ahead. "Ma'am," the lead officer, a broad-shouldered man with a close-cropped haircut and icy blue eyes, called out as he neared. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in this area. Mind if we ask you a few questions?" Evelyn straightened her back, calling upon the quiet strength that had helped her endure countless challenges over the years. "Of course, officer," she replied, her voice calm, though inside she felt a pulse of anxiety. "I'm not sure how much help I can be. I've just been sitting here enjoying the afternoon." A younger female officer, her expression softer and more compassionate, stepped forward. "Ma'am, a neighbor reported seeing someone matching your description walking around the area, peering into windows. Can you tell us where you've been in the past hour?" Evelyn's eyes widened, a mixture of disbelief and indignation flooding her features. "Young lady, I've been right here on this porch since lunch. I haven't moved an inch, let alone been snooping around the neighborhood. At my age, such a thing would be quite the accomplishment." The third officer, who'd been silently observing, let out a disbelieving snort. "Sure, lady. We've got a witness who says otherwise. Why don't you just admit what you were really up to?" A surge of defiance rose within Evelyn. "Young man," she began firmly, "I've lived in this house for over 50 years. I've got no interest in looking into anyone's windows, nor any reason to. I am a law-abiding citizen, and I won't stand for being accused of such nonsense." The lead officer's demeanor hardened, his posture becoming more forceful. "Listen, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. Just confess you were scoping out the houses, and we'll sort it out down at the station." Evelyn's hands began to tremble, but her voice remained steady. "I've done nothing wrong, and I have no intention of leaving this porch. If you've got more questions, you can ask them right here." Tension quickly escalated. The officers, growing frustrated with Evelyn's refusal to cooperate, began to question her very right to be in the neighborhood. "Let's see some ID," one demanded, skepticism lacing his tone. Evelyn's patience was running thin. "I don't carry ID just to sit on my own porch," she retorted, her voice sharper now. "My name is Evelyn Harris, and as I've said, I've lived here for more than half a century. If you don't believe me, you can check the property records." The lead officer's face darkened with anger. "All right, that's enough. If you won't cooperate, we're taking you in for obstruction of justice. Stand up slowly and put your hands behind your back." Evelyn's heart raced as she grasped the gravity of the situation. She thought of her son, Aaron, and the values of dignity and resilience she had instilled in him over the years. Taking a deep breath, she made her choice. "I will not," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. "I've done nothing wrong, and I will not be treated like a criminal in my own home. If you want to arrest me, you'll have to drag me off this porch, but I won't go quietly." The officers exchanged uneasy glances, clearly taken aback by the fierce resolve of the elderly woman before them. As they debated their next move, Evelyn silently prayed for strength and for someone, anyone, to bear witness to what was unfolding. Unbeknownst to her, the events of that afternoon were about to trigger a chain reaction that would rock the local police force and ripple through the entire community. As the tension on Evelyn's porch escalated, A sleek black SUV glided to a stop by the curb. The officers, deeply engrossed in their standoff with Evelyn, barely noticed the arrival until a firm, authoritative voice sliced through the air. "What's happening here?" Every head turned to see a tall, distinguished black man in his early 50s approaching the porch with purposeful strides. His tailored suit and commanding presence demanded instant attention. Evelyn's face softened with relief, her posture easing. "Aaron," she called, her voice trembling slightly. "Thank God you're here." The lead officer, sensing a shift in the energy, stepped forward. "Sir, this is police business. I need you to step back." Aaron's eyes narrowed, surveying the scene, his elderly mother, visibly shaken yet defiant, surrounded by tense officers on her own doorstep. His voice, calm but simmering with controlled anger, cut through the officer's words. "Officer, I am Judge Aaron Harris of the Georgia Superior Court," he began, gesturing toward Evelyn. "And this," he pointed, "is my mother. Now, I'd like you to explain why you're intimidating an elderly woman on her own property before I start making calls you won't want me to make." The shift in the officers' demeanor was immediate and palpable. The color drained from their faces as the gravity of the situation sank in. The lead officer, now visibly unsettled, stammered, Judge Harris, there was a report of suspicious activity in the area and—" Aaron raised his hand, silencing the officer. "And you assumed my mother, who's lived in this neighborhood for over 50 years, was the suspect. Based on what evidence?" His voice was steady, but laced with fury. As the officers floundered for words, a small crowd of neighbors had gathered, drawn by the escalating scene. Among them was Mrs. Thornton, who now looked distinctly uncomfortable. Aaron, noticing her, called out, "Ma'am, were you the one who made this report?" Mrs. Thornton hesitated before stepping forward. I did call the police," she admitted. "I saw someone I didn't recognize walking around, and with all the recent break-ins." "And did this person you saw bear any resemblance to my mother?" Aaron's voice was sharp but controlled. Mrs. Thornton flushed, glancing at Evelyn properly for perhaps the first time. "I'm not sure. It all happened so fast and—" Aaron turned back to the officers, his expression firm. "So, let me get this straight. You received a vague report about a suspicious person, and your immediate response was to come here and attempt to arrest my mother, a respected member of this community, without any real evidence." The atmosphere had completely shifted. What started as a tense standoff now felt more like a reckoning. The officers, once confident in their authority, looked chastened, their earlier bravado replaced by discomfort. The neighbors watched in silence, the weight of what nearly transpired settling over the group. Evelyn, still seated in her rocking chair, observed the unfolding scene with a mix of gratitude and sorrow. Her son's power and reputation had protected her from what could have been a dangerous situation. Yet the bitter reality that such protection was even necessary hung heavy in the air. As Aaron began to enumerate the legal and ethical breaches committed by the officers, Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment, sending up a quiet prayer of thanks for her son's timely intervention. But she also prayed for change, for healing, and for a day when such events would no longer be a reflection of the world they lived in. This moment, revealing not just who Evelyn was, but who her son was, would leave ripples across the neighborhood and beyond, its impact destined to be felt long after the last words were spoken. In the tense aftermath of Aaron's arrival, Evelyn found herself standing at a pivotal moment in her life. Though the immediate danger had passed, the weight of what had just transpired lingered heavily on her heart. As she watched her son sternly rebuke the officers, a cascade of memories, both filled with joy and deep sorrow, washed over her. She recalled the countless times she had faced prejudice and the fierce battles she had fought to raise Aaron in a world that seemed, at every turn, determined to work against them. Evelyn's mind wandered to the young people in her community, those who didn't have a figure like Judge Harris to shield them from harm. And in that moment, Evelyn made a choice that would change not only her life, but the lives of many who shared her struggles. "Aaron," she called, her voice steady, though soft. "That's enough, son." The air seemed to shift as all eyes turned toward her. Slowly rising from her rocking chair, Evelyn carried herself with a quiet, unshakable dignity. Her posture firm, her chin raised, she addressed the crowd. "What happened today isn't just about me. It's about every person who looks like me. Every person who doesn't have a son in a position of power to protect them. We can't just let this go." Aaron looked at her, a blend of concern and admiration playing across his face. "What do you want to do, Mum?" he asked gently. Evelyn took a long, deliberate breath before answering. "I want to file a formal complaint, not just against these officers, but against the department for allowing this kind of behavior to persist. And I want to speak out, not just for myself, but for others who've faced the same injustice. Change is long overdue, and if I have to be the one to spark it, then so be it." The repercussions of her decision came quickly and with great force. The officers, already unnerved by the situation, appeared truly shaken by the thought of an official complaint from the mother of a judge. The neighbors who had gathered murmured amongst themselves, some nodding in agreement, while others shifted uneasily in the face of an escalating conflict. After a moment of quiet reflection, Aaron nodded. "If that's what you want, Mom, I'll stand with you every step of the way. But are you certain this won't be easy?" Evelyn's eyes gleamed with resolve. "I've never backed down from a fight for what's right, and I'm not about to start now." In the weeks that followed, Evelyn's bold decision unleashed a wave of events that rocked the local community. Her official complaint triggered an internal investigation into the police department, unearthing a disturbing pattern of racial profiling and misconduct. Evelyn's story was soon picked up by local news and quickly gained national attention, becoming a powerful symbol for those fighting against systemic racism in law enforcement. The once quiet woman was now thrust into the public eye, giving interviews and speaking at community gatherings. It was exhausting work, especially for someone her age. But Evelyn found strength in the unwavering support of her son and the knowledge that she was part of something bigger than herself. However, the road ahead wasn't without its obstacles. Threatening phone calls and letters began to pour in from people who viewed her actions as an attack on law enforcement. Some neighbors, uncomfortable with the spotlight Evelyn's case had brought to their street, grew cold and distant. The police department, feeling under siege, initially responded by going on the defensive. They tried to discredit Evelyn by digging up trivial infractions from her past in a desperate attempt to tarnish her reputation. But Evelyn's character was unassailable, and the truth of her case was undeniable. Their smear campaign only backfired, further fueling the public's outrage. Aaron, as promised, remained by his mother's side through it all. He used his influence within the legal community to ensure her case received the attention it deserved, and that she had top-tier legal representation. Still, his outspoken defense of his mother's cause began to strain his professional relationships, as colleagues who preferred to avoid controversy grew wary of his involvement. Despite the toll it took on both of them, neither Evelyn nor Aaron wavered. They were prepared for the fight ahead, knowing it was a battle for justice, one they couldn't afford to lose. There were murmurs questioning his fairness, insinuations that he should step aside from cases involving the police. As the days stretched into weeks and months, Evelyn's situation ignited larger conversations about race and inequality within the community. Town hall meetings sprang up, bringing together local residents, law enforcement, and community leaders to tackle the deep-rooted issues of bias and discrimination. Evelyn found herself at the heart of these discussions. Her calm resolve and steadfast pursuit of justice gradually earned her the respect of even those who had once opposed her. She began collaborating with youth organizations, sharing her story and encouraging young people to advocate for their rights, while fostering better relationships with law enforcement. However, the weight of her newfound role as a community leader began to take a toll on Evelyn's health. There were nights when she lay in bed, questioning whether she had made the right choice, wondering if sacrificing her peace and privacy was worth it. But then she'd receive a letter from a young person moved by her actions, or hear a news report about reforms being implemented within the police department, and she knew she had chosen the right path. As the ripple effects of her decisions continued to play out, Evelyn often reflected on the words she had spoken to Aaron on that pivotal day. It's time for change, and if I have to be the one to begin it, then so be it. Back then, she couldn't have foreseen the magnitude of the impact her stand would have, nor the personal cost it would demand. Yet, as she sat on her porch in the evenings, watching her neighborhood through a fresh perspective, Evelyn felt a sense of purpose, stronger than ever before. The road ahead was bound to be tough, but Evelyn Harris was ready to confront it head-on, equipped with a lifetime of wisdom and a newfound determination to see justice prevail, not just for herself, but for her entire community. As Evelyn's journey for justice gained momentum, another subplot began to emerge, adding layers of complexity to the already volatile situation. Officer Mia Gonzalez, a young Hispanic woman who had been present during the initial confrontation, found herself haunted by the memory of that day. Unlike her fellow officers who closed ranks and defended their actions, Mia couldn't shake the gnawing sense that what they had done to Evelyn was profoundly wrong. Motivated by guilt and a deep desire to see things change, Mia began documenting other instances of racial profiling and misconduct within the department. She kept a meticulous record, logging dates, times, and the names of officers involved in questionable acts. Her efforts, though rooted in a genuine push for reform, put her in a precarious position within the department. Meanwhile, Mrs. Thornton, the neighbor who had called the police on Evelyn in the first place, was wrestling with her own moral dilemma. The backlash against her had been fierce, with many in the community branding her as a racist. Stricken with guilt and desperate to make things right, Mrs. Thornton reached out to Evelyn, requesting a face-to-face meeting to offer her apology. Their encounter, initially tense and uncomfortable, soon became a turning point. Drawing on her years of wisdom and capacity for forgiveness, Evelyn listened patiently to Mrs. Thornton's tearful apology and shared her experiences of life as a Black woman in America. That conversation sparked an unlikely friendship between the two women, with Mrs. Thornton emerging as an unexpected ally in Evelyn's ongoing fight for justice. As personal dramas unfolded, the broader community was also grappling with its own turmoil. Inspired by Evelyn's courageous stand, local activists pushed the city council to debate new measures aimed at increasing police accountability. This ignited passionate discussions that split the community in two. While some called for reform, others stood firmly by the status quo. Caught in the middle was Judge Aaron Harris, whose public support for his mother's cause had thrust him into an increasingly precarious position. Within the legal community, his colleagues were divided. Some questioned whether his impartiality had been compromised, while others admired his unwavering courage. Aaron now had to balance the weight of his personal convictions with the heavy responsibilities of his profession. Amid this growing tension, the police department, feeling the pressure from all sides, launched a public relations campaign to soften their image. They held community outreach events and implemented sensitivity training for officers, but many residents saw these actions as little more than surface-level attempts to skirt real reform. Meanwhile, Officer Mia Gonzalez continued to secretly compile damning evidence of internal misconduct, the weight of which only increased her inner turmoil. As she struggled with the decision of whether to blow the whistle, she found an unexpected confidant in Judge Harris. Their secretive meetings, tinged with both legal and ethical concerns, added another layer of complexity to the already tense situation. On another front, Mrs. Thornton, deeply influenced by her conversations with Evelyn, launched a neighborhood initiative to bridge the divide between long-established residents and newcomers. Her well-meaning efforts, however, often led to uncomfortable encounters where old prejudices and misunderstandings surfaced. Yet, despite these challenges, the various storylines were beginning to converge in surprising ways. Officer Gonzalez's growing collection of evidence proved to be a critical asset in the City Council's police reform debates, while Mrs. Thornton's neighborhood group became a platform for discussing the broader impact of Evelyn's fight for justice. As these secondary plots gained momentum, they set the stage for a dramatic climax, one that would force everyone involved to confront their own biases, challenge their assumptions, and strive for true change within their community. The ripple effects of Evelyn's stand against injustice were undeniable, influencing not only the course of policy, but also the relationships between the central players in this unfolding drama. Evelyn and Mrs. Thornton's unlikely friendship grew stronger, moving beyond their initial roles of accuser and accused. Their frequent afternoon tea gatherings on Evelyn's front porch soon became a powerful symbol of healing and growth. Evelyn often shared stories of her past during the civil rights era, and one afternoon, addressing Mrs. Thornton by her first name, she said, "Mildred, when I was your age, I never imagined I'd be sitting here sharing tea with a white neighbor who once called the police on me." Mrs. Thornton's eyes welled with tears. "Evelyn, I can't express how sorry I am for what I did, but I'm so thankful for this chance to learn and grow." Their growing bond didn't go unnoticed. Neighbors who had previously kept their distance from the controversy now found inspiration in their example. Slowly, the atmosphere of mistrust that had gripped the community began to melt away. At the same time, the relationship between Officer Gonzalez and Judge Harris evolved from cautious allies into trusted confidants. Their covert meetings to discuss the mounting evidence of police misconduct fostered a unique bond, filled with both tension and respect. During one such meeting in the quiet of a local park, Mia finally voiced her deepest fear. "Judge Harris, if I go public with this information, my career is finished. But if I don't, how could I ever live with myself?" Maya's voice wavered under the weight of her moral dilemma. Aaron, sensing the gravity of her struggle, replied, "Maya, doing the right thing is rarely easy, but it's always worth it." Their shared devotion to justice, despite the personal costs, created a bond that went beyond their professional lives, forming a connection rooted in their mutual values. Meanwhile, Evelyn's relationship with her son Aaron was also evolving. They had always been close, but now they found themselves united in a fight that transcended personal ties. Aaron couldn't help but admire his mother, saying, "Mom, I've always been proud of you, but what you're doing now, it's incredible, beyond anything I could have imagined." Evelyn smiled, her eyes gleaming with affection. "Well, where do you think you got your sense of justice from?" she teased gently. "It certainly wasn't from those law books of yours." Their laughter, soft and genuine, danced in the cool evening air, a reflection of the deep love and respect that had only grown stronger through adversity. Evelyn's standing in the community was also undergoing a profound change. Once seen as just another quiet, elderly neighbor, she had now become a beacon of wisdom and moral courage. Young activists sought her counsel, and longtime residents marveled at the fire within her, a strength they had never fully recognized. At a town hall meeting held in the local church, a young black man stood up, his voice trembling with emotion. "Miss Harris," he began, "seeing you stand up to those officers, hearing your story, it's given me hope. It makes me believe that change is possible." Evelyn's eyes brimmed with tears as she looked out at the crowd, a diverse group of faces, all turned toward her with admiration and respect. In that moment, she realized her personal stand for justice had sparked something larger, a collective movement toward healing and progress. But not all relationships were strengthened by these events. Officer Gonzalez found herself increasingly isolated within the police department as she quietly documented the corruption she witnessed. Her once friendly rapport with her colleagues soured, replaced by cold stares and whispered suspicions. Her loyalty to the unwritten code of police solidarity had been called into question, leaving her on the outside. Similarly, Aaron's relationships with some of his fellow judges grew strained. What used to be casual lunches and easy conversations had turned into formal nods in courthouse hallways as the controversy surrounding Evelyn's case deepened. These fractured relationships, though painful, served to highlight the deeper issues at play, issues that needed to be confronted if true reconciliation was ever to be achieved. Each strained interaction reflected the broader challenges facing the community, a microcosm of the larger struggle for understanding and justice. Evelyn, observing the shifting dynamics around her, came to understand that real change wouldn't just come from laws and policies. It would come from the difficult, patient work of building bridges between people. As she sat on her porch that evening, the sun dipping below the horizon, Evelyn felt a flicker of hope. Despite the tensions and heartache, she knew that the bonds being formed and tested through this experience were the foundation for a more just and compassionate community. The day of the town hall meeting arrived, thick with anticipation. What had started as a local incident had ballooned into a flashpoint for conversations about racial justice, police reform, and the future of community relations. The large auditorium was packed with people from all corners of the town, as well as local officials and members of the press. Evelyn sat in the front row, her posture steady and her eyes clear, with Aaron on one side and Mrs. Thornton on the other. The weight of the moment was unmistakable, but Evelyn's heart was steady. This was the beginning of something much bigger than any one person. The police chief, along with several officers, including Maya Gonzalez, sat across the stage, the air thick with unspoken tension. As the mayor called the meeting to order, a quiet settled over the room. "We're here today," he began, his voice resonating in the hall, "to address the incident involving Mrs. Evelyn Harris and to confront the larger issues it has uncovered within our community." At first, the meeting proceeded calmly, with various community leaders sharing their viewpoints. But once the floor opened for public comments, the deep fractures within the community quickly surfaced. Raised voices echoed from every corner of the room. "The police were just doing their job," a man yelled, his face flushed with anger. "We can't hold them back when they're the ones keeping us safe." "And what about our safety?" countered a young black woman, her voice steady but fierce. "Who protects us from those who are supposed to serve and protect?" The tension in the auditorium surged. Years of suppressed frustration and fear began to boil over, igniting a heated exchange between community members and supporters of law enforcement. The mayor struggled to maintain control, but the meeting was spiraling into chaos. Then, Officer Maya Gonzalez rose to her feet, her face ashen but resolute. "I have something to say," she called out, her voice cutting through the noise. All eyes turned to her as she walked toward the podium. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled a thick folder from her bag. "For months," Maya began, her voice gaining momentum, "I've been documenting incidents of racial profiling and misconduct within our department. What happened to Mrs. Harris isn't an isolated case. It's part of a larger pattern, and it has to stop." The room exploded. Some of Maya's fellow officers stared at her in disbelief, their faces a mixture of shock and betrayal. The police chief, visibly outraged, struggled to find his words, his face growing redder by the second. Shouts rang out from the crowd, some cheering Maya's courage, others accusing her of turning her back on the badge. In that pivotal moment, Evelyn Harris stood. Despite her email, she seemed to command the room as she approached the podium. Maya stepped aside as Evelyn took her place, and an immediate hush fell over the crowd. "Look at us," Evelyn began, her voice steady and filled with quiet authority. "Look at what we're doing to each other. This anger, this fear, it's why we need change. But we won't get there by shouting over one another or by pointing fingers." Her words struck a chord, cutting through the chaos like a beacon. Slowly, the hostility that had filled the room began to subside, replaced by a collective sense of realization. "We have a choice," Evelyn continued, her gaze sweeping over the crowd. "We can let this tear us apart, or we can use this moment to come together, to really listen, and to work toward meaningful, lasting change. The road ahead won't be easy, but nothing worthwhile ever is." As her words lingered in the air, the room stood at a crossroads. The truth had been spoken, the underlying issues laid bare. Now it was up to the community to decide whether they would seize this moment to heal and rebuild, or remain divided by the same old wounds. In the days following that tumultuous town hall meeting, Evelyn Harris found herself at the heart of a community-wide effort to address the deep-seated issues exposed that night. Heated debates, intense conversations, and fervent organizing filled the following days as various factions sought a way forward. Recognizing the need for a more structured and focused approach, Evelyn, along with Aaron, Maya Gonzalez, and other local leaders, organized a series of smaller, more concentrated discussions aimed at real solutions. They soon realized that while the large public forum had been a powerful tool, it was too overwhelming for many to engage in meaningful dialogue. These smaller groups fostered more personal conversations, where individuals felt safe to express their true feelings and experiences. In one such gathering, a diverse group of residents came together, including long-time community members, new homeowners, and local business owners. The tension in the room was unmistakable as Evelyn opened the discussion. "We're not here to assign blame or point fingers," she began, her voice steady but compassionate. "We're here to listen and understand. Every single person in this room has valid concerns and experiences. Our goal is to find a path forward that takes all of them into account." As the conversation unfolded, it became clear that the issues ran deeper than just police practices or racial profiling. People spoke of feeling disconnected from a neighborhood that was changing around them, of fears about crime and property values, and of the difficulty in bridging cultural divides. An elderly white man, a resident for over 40 years, voiced his feelings. "Sometimes I don't even recognize this place anymore," he said, his voice rough with emotion. It's not about race, it's about feeling like a stranger in the place I've called home for decades. A young black woman responded, her voice wavering slightly. And we feel like strangers too, in a place that should feel like home to us. Can you understand what it's like to be seen as a threat just for existing in your own neighborhood? These raw, honest exchanges were painful, but necessary. Evelyn and her team worked tirelessly to create an environment where everyone's voice was heard and respected, all while gently encouraging participants to consider perspectives outside their own. Alongside these community dialogues, Evelyn collaborated closely with Aaron and Maya to address issues within the police department. Together, they organized meetings between community members and police officers, facilitated by professional mediators. These meetings were often charged with emotion, but they offered a critical space for both sides to see one another as people, not enemies. In one particularly moving session, a young black man shared his experiences of being stopped and questioned repeatedly by the police. "I feel like a criminal, just walking down the street," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. A veteran officer, clearly moved, responded, I never realized that's how we were coming across. We're trained to stay alert, but I see now that vigilance without understanding can feel a lot like prejudice." These moments of connection, while small, were crucial steps toward resolving the conflict. Evelyn understood that real change would take time, but each breakthrough felt like progress in the right direction. As part of their ongoing efforts, Evelyn and her team also worked with city officials to implement tangible reforms. They advocated for greater transparency in police practices, pushed for the creation of community oversight boards, and helped develop new training programs for officers, focusing on cultural sensitivity and de-escalation techniques. Yet, the path to resolution was anything but smooth. Setbacks and moments of high tension threatened to derail the progress made. A police shooting in a nearby city rekindled tensions, sparking protests and demands for immediate action. In response, Evelyn organized a peace walk through the neighborhood. Unlike a protest, this event was meant to unite people in a shared purpose of healing. Residents from all walks of life joined together, walking side by side, some holding hands, others engaging in conversations with neighbors they had never spoken to before. The walk was a powerful symbol of hope and unity in the midst of turmoil. As the weeks turned into months, the impact of their conflict resolution efforts became increasingly apparent. Reports of racial profiling steadily declined, and community satisfaction with local law enforcement showed a noticeable improvement. The Community Oversight Board, after overcoming some initial hurdles, began proving itself to be an invaluable tool for maintaining accountability and promoting transparency. Evelyn's approach to resolving conflicts, centered on listening, fostering understanding, and finding common ground, soon began to ripple throughout the community. Neighborhood associations adopted similar strategies for tackling local challenges, while schools introduced programs aimed at teaching students the importance of diversity and conflict resolution. Yet, Evelyn and her team had to accept a hard truth. Not all conflicts could be completely resolved. Some wounds ran too deep, and some differences were too ingrained to be reconciled easily. They learned to redefine success, not as achieving perfect harmony, but as creating spaces where difficult conversations could unfold with respect and productivity. As their work progressed, Evelyn often found herself recalling the words of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr., whom she had once marched alongside in her youth. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. She recognized that their efforts were a part of that long arc, each small victory contributing to the broader journey toward a fairer, more just society. Though the road ahead remained long, Evelyn felt a growing sense of hope. She understood that by addressing these conflicts, they weren't just solving immediate problems. They were laying the foundation for a more unified and compassionate community that would benefit future generations. The months of difficult community dialogues, policy shifts, and personal growth marked a profound turning point, not only for Evelyn, but for the entire neighborhood. What had once been a terrifying confrontation on her porch had blossomed into a powerful movement for change, touching every corner of the community. This transformation brought both new challenges and opportunities, setting Evelyn and her allies on an exciting yet uncertain path. One evening, as Evelyn sat on her porch, reflecting on the progress they had made, her phone rang unexpectedly. It was the mayor of a nearby city, who had heard about the incredible transformation happening in Evelyn's neighborhood. The mayor asked if Evelyn would be willing to share her experiences and strategies with other communities facing similar challenges. This was a pivotal moment for Evelyn. The chance to broaden the impact of their work was greater than she had ever imagined, but it also meant stepping further into the spotlight and shouldering responsibilities that felt daunting for someone her age. After thoughtful deliberation and long conversations with Aaron Meyer and her trusted circle, Evelyn made a bold decision. She would accept the invitation, viewing it as an opportunity to extend the reach of their work beyond the boundaries of their own neighborhood. "We have a real opportunity here," Evelyn explained to her core group, Aaron Meyer and Mrs. Thornton among them. "What we've started in our community could spark a movement that changes the way police and communities interact across the country." The group was energized by the idea, but fully aware of the challenges ahead. Expanding their efforts would require additional resources, careful organization, and a willingness to engage with communities that might resist change even more than their own had. Backed by her loyal supporters, Evelyn began drafting a plan for a new initiative. Its mission would be to provide resources, training, and support to communities looking to confront racial bias in policing and improve relations between law enforcement and the people they serve. The project, which they named Bridges of Understanding, aimed to unite local community leaders, law enforcement officers, and advocates for social justice under a common cause. It was designed as a holistic approach to community reform, built on the lessons they had each gathered from their own lived experiences. As word of this initiative spread, it ignited a renewed sense of hope and purpose within the community. People who had been involved in local efforts saw this as a chance to contribute to something larger. Local businesses stepped forward with support. Schools began integrating conflict resolution techniques into their curricula, and even some police officers, moved by Meyer's leadership, offered to share their stories with other departments. However, this new path wasn't without obstacles. Some in the community feared that focusing on national issues might pull attention away from ongoing local work. Others worried about the heightened scrutiny that came with raising their profile. Despite these concerns, Evelyn felt an unwavering certainty that they were on the right track. Standing in front of the newly rented office that would serve as headquarters for Bridges of Understanding, she felt a mixture of excitement and nervous anticipation. What had begun with a terrifying encounter on her front porch had now led to this pivotal moment. The start of a movement with the potential to change communities across the nation. It was a turning point, not just for Evelyn, but for everyone involved in this transformative journey. As Evelyn stepped into the office, she knew that the real work was only just beginning. In the months following the launch of Bridges of Understanding, she often found herself reflecting on the path that had brought her here. The face she saw in the mirror each morning was both familiar and new. The same features that had borne witness to nearly 80 years of life now held a spark of purpose and clarity she hadn't known before. Evelyn recognized that she had developed a resilience she never thought possible, even after all the hardships she had faced throughout her life. The confrontation with the police, the upheaval within her community, and the pressure of leading a national effort had pushed her to her limits. She had weathered public criticism, wrestled with intricate social issues, and shouldered the heavy responsibility of being a voice for change. Yet, through all of it, she had emerged stronger, more determined, and deeply committed to her mission. Evelyn's perspective on social change had evolved significantly. While she had always believed in the power of individual actions, she now saw how a single event could ignite a movement, how personal stories could fuel systemic transformation. She understood, more than ever, the importance of bridging divides, creating spaces for difficult conversations, and the power of empathy to overcome deeply ingrained biases. Perhaps the most profound change in Evelyn was her growth as a leader. Once content to quietly support her community, she had been thrust into the national spotlight as an advocate for reform in police-community relations. She had learned to navigate media interviews, to speak passionately and effectively to diverse audiences, and to build alliances between groups with differing interests and perspectives. This new role brought its own set of challenges. Evelyn often felt the weight of her responsibility, knowing that her words and actions could have ripple effects in communities across the country. There were moments of doubt, times when she wondered if she was truly the right person to lead such a movement. In moments like these, Evelyn often found herself recalling the words she had spoken to Aaron on that pivotal day. "It's time for things to change. And if I have to be the one to start it, then so be it." Reflecting on how her relationships had shifted, Evelyn realized how much had evolved since then. Her bond with Aaron had grown deeper. They were no longer just mother and son, but partners in a shared purpose. She had formed unexpected connections, like the unlikely friendship with Mrs. Thornton, which symbolized the very change they sought. Even her interactions with Maya Gonzalez had transformed, becoming a story of growth and redemption within the very systems they aimed to reform. As Evelyn prepared herself for another day filled with meetings, interviews, and strategic planning, she couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude despite the battles still ahead. The incident that had set everything in motion had shaken her out of any complacency, forcing her to confront hard truths about both the world and herself. It had been a journey of transformation, one that had not only changed her personally, but also inspired growth in those around her. Evelyn Harris, the elderly woman once humiliated on her own porch, had risen as more than just a survivor. She was now an advocate, a community leader, and a symbol of resilience and change. As she looked forward, she knew she was ready to face whatever lay ahead. Armed with hard-earned wisdom, unshakable resolve, and an unwavering commitment to justice and equality. She glanced at a framed photo sitting on her desk, a snapshot of herself with her core team of allies, including Aaron, Maya, and Mrs. Thornton. It was a daily reminder of just how far they had come and how much work still remained. With a deep breath and a determined smile, Evelyn stepped out to face yet another day of fighting for the change she believed the world so desperately needed. Her personal growth, along with her evolution as a leader, had equipped her for this never-ending journey. Evelyn understood that every challenge she encountered and every community she helped brought her one step closer to building a fairer, more inclusive society. A vision that had been born out of an injustice on her porch had since blossomed into something far greater than herself. Now, as Evelyn stood at the podium, preparing to deliver the keynote speech at the National Conference on Community Policing and Racial Equity, She took a moment to absorb the diverse crowd before her. Police officers, community organizers, policymakers, and citizens from all across the country had gathered, drawn by the possibility of a new way forward, one that addressed the deep-rooted issues of racial bias and the fractured relationship between law enforcement and communities. In this moment, Evelyn recognized that this was the culmination of a long journey, one that had begun with a terrifying confrontation and had since morphed into a movement for meaningful change. The themes that had been constant throughout her experience: resilience in the face of injustice, the power of a united community, the necessity of open dialogue, and the ability for personal growth to ignite societal transformation, were all reflected in the gathering before her. As she began to speak, Evelyn masterfully wove these themes together, illustrating the undeniable link between individual stories and systemic change. She recounted her own confrontation not as a tale of victimhood, but as a powerful catalyst for transformation. She shared stories of Maya, Mrs. Thornton, and others from her community, offering them as living proof that by confronting uncomfortable truths, real and lasting change could be achieved. Our journey toward justice and equality is far from complete, she concluded, her voice resonating with conviction. But what we have come to understand is that real change starts within each of us. It begins in our courage to face our own prejudices, in our openness to hearing stories that differ from our own, and in our commitment to work together toward a shared vision. Every conversation, every shift in policy, every moment of empathy brings us one step closer to the society we dream of creating. The applause that filled the room was more than just a polite gesture. It was a unified expression of support for a renewed vision of justice, police reform, and stronger community ties. As Evelyn stepped down from the podium, she was enveloped by a sense of both closure and new beginnings. The long and painful ordeal that had started on her doorstep had led to this transformative moment, not just for her, but for communities across the country. In the applause, in the faces of the inspired audience, Evelyn saw the hopeful glimmer of a future where justice, compassion, and equality weren't just ideals spoken of in speeches, but principles lived out in everyday life. It was a future she now felt part of shaping. One conversation, one community, one changed heart at a time.